Before there's hope for tomorrow, we must first embark on the darkest hour.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Season 1 finale of The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Tonight, I have the honor of hosting you for not only the 11 o'clock hour, but also the 12 o'clock hour, the witching hour, all in celebration for our first season coming to a close. This season has been filled with terrifying encounters, things that couldn't be explained, hours of recounting chilling events, far-fetched ideas that became the reality for some. It's been the sharing of sensational experiences, and it's been my pleasure. Rest assured, our season finale will be no different. Tonight's episode will be equally, no, more creepy than all those that have come before it. So, let's get started, shall we? This was back in 1996, and it happened while my brother and I were making our way home to Fresno, California, after spending a week in Las Vegas. We were, and though we still are, big golf players and big golf fans. This was our first real tournament that we were ever spectating. The trip was for our birthday. We aren't twins, but we do share the same birthday 2 years apart, so we often celebrated together. It was my 22nd and his 24th. We'd spent about a week golfing, networking, and hotel hopping, basically enjoying some time off while we waited for the main event on Sunday. We would watch Tiger Woods take it all home at what was known as the Las Vegas Invitational at the time. It was a good day for golf, but also a long day. My brother and I don't really drink, but we had a few beers throughout the day. After that, it was lights out until morning, when we'd drive back to Fresno. So it was Monday, October 7th. We made a stop for breakfast at the edge of town and plodded our way home. Neither of us had to work until the following day, so we figured we could take the scenic route, or at least somewhat interesting route, back home. This would take us up through Death Valley and Death Valley National Park. By the time we hit the general area, it was around 1 in the afternoon, and we decided to take a small hike. It really wasn't supposed to be anything crazy, but it took longer than expected when my brother ended up twisting his ankle on a fall. Nothing serious. It just made for some slower walking back to the car, and it was a bit swollen. I volunteered to drive, while my brother read the map and gave me directions. We'd been on the road for well over an hour, and it was around 6 p.m. now, almost dusk. The calming silence in the car was interrupted when my brother was excitedly asking me if I could see that and pointing out his window. I tried to duck my head a bit to see, but then my brother told me suddenly to watch the road. I'd slightly swerved into the other lane. Though there wasn't a car in sight, I understood his point, and I kept looking at the road, responding that no, I didn't see it. I had to look at the road. I said this jokingly, but he didn't joke back as he normally would. He continued to stare out the window, and then I heard him rolling his window down. My peripherals were telling me that he was practically hanging out of the car. I'm tempted to look, but to avoid any issues, I just ask him, "Dude, what are you looking at?" He slides his head back into the car and tells me that he has no idea, but it looks like the bottom of something and it's got lights. He's telling me it's no way that it's a plane, it's way too close. I ask if I should pull over, but he tells me to keep driving. The anticipation of what the hell had grabbed his attention was killing me, but I kept driving. Then I saw the lights. I wasn't sure what I was looking at, not at first glance, and not now really either. So many lights. Too many for a plane. What the hell was that? We kept repeating this amongst ourselves several times. The further ahead of us it got, the more I was able to see it. This thing wasn't the shape of a plane. It seemed more like a rectangle. But the lights themselves, they seemed to be on the bottom, and they seemed to be set in triangular patterns. Yellow and orange lights, but white ones too. The largest of the lights were the bluish-white ones. There were 3 of them, one on each section of the larger rectangle. "Speed up," I heard my brother say. I finally looked over at him, and he said confidently, "We're chasing this thing." He told me to watch the road, but to go faster. I didn't hesitate to hit the gas. The roads were empty, and my heart was racing. I couldn't believe what was hovering above us right now. It was gaining speed, much faster than we were. I was sure that we were going to lose this thing, but I kept going as my brother once again hung out the window. I couldn't tell if he was yelling at this thing or just yelling in excitement. I had the idea to turn the radio on just to see if there was anything being reported on there, flying or hovering objects over the sky. But when the radio continuously reflected no signal, I gave up on that. Kept chasing. We passed a sign for Red Rock Canyon, and it was 6:06 p.m. And then it was 7:44 p.m. The car wasn't moving. We were pulled off to the side of the road, and it was practically pitch black. The keys were not in the ignition. Instead, they sat in the cup holder between the 2 seats. I felt slightly disoriented but not sleepy. Looking over at my brother, he was looking at me. We looked the same, confused but awake. Neither of us were quite sure where we were or what had happened. I pulled onto the road without giving it much thought, and after driving a minute, I started to recall that it had been earlier and that it was lighter outside. 6:06. Then we passed a sign for Golden Hills. Something was seriously wrong. But still, we didn't say anything for a long time. I pulled the car over and decided just to look at the car. Maybe we'd hit something and somehow made our way to the shoulder. Before getting out, I looked in the mirror. I had no marks to indicate I'd hit my head or anything like that. I looked at my brother again, and he was also fine. The car, like us, was completely fine. Not a single scratch. We'd just passed through the town of Golden Hills, and I told my brother I didn't understand what the hell had just happened. He wasn't immediately chatty, but then he finally let up, asking me if I remembered anything past chasing that thing. And then he stopped. I could feel him staring at me before asking or confirming. "We did see that thing, right? That wasn't a dream?" "It wasn't a dream," I told him. If it was, we'd shared the exact same one. We both agreed that there was no way we'd gone from Red Rock to Golden Hills without remembering. That's 45 miles and almost 2 hours of time that's unaccounted for. We agreed it wasn't possible, but We couldn't ignore the fact that it was our reality. The drive home was as weird as the experience itself. Just when we didn't think it could get any weirder, I stop at the gas station to use the restroom and fill up. My brother follows me to see if he should do the same. I hear him say my name behind me, so I turn around and, in almost disbelief, he tells me that his ankle is completely fine, despite not elevating it the entire drive and not having iced it. I looked at it. The ankle wasn't even remotely swollen, and he was practically running over to me with no issue. We have no idea or explanation for any of this, outside of the idea that whatever was up there didn't want us to chase it, and somehow it got its way. I've always been appreciative that whatever happened out there, we ended up all right. In my brother's case, we actually ended up in better shape than before. So eventually we'd have no choice but to just let it go. Even to this day, we aren't privy to any new details. We can still vividly recall the object itself, its lights, how close it was to us, yet we didn't feel any heat or hear any noise. We recall it was massive, but elusive. Lastly, we remember chasing it and everything else leading up to 6:06. So, what happened between then and 7:44? I think us not knowing or not having an answer is the point. A little over 9 years ago, my family drove from Central Texas to some small town in Louisiana for a family Thanksgiving. My parents or my aunt, I don't recall, had rented this house that was exactly halfway between our families. The closest big town was Shreveport, where we had passed a Jack-in-the-Box. We thought we might see another by the time we'd gotten to this place. But it was a small town, and there was no other Jack-in-the-Box or any other fast food. It was about midnight when we arrived at the home, and my family, which consisted of my 2 younger sisters, my mom, and my dad, had all decided that they were going to go back to the Jack-in-the-Box that we'd passed several miles back. I was tired of being in the car, so I said that I would hang back and put the bags away or whatever. I had decided to pick out my room upstairs when I heard my mom yell up that one of my sisters would be staying. After putting some stuff away, I settled into the large couch in the living room, and I started to watch TV. I was dozing off, but I wasn't asleep. I can remember what sounded like bare feet running on the hardwood. I didn't think twice about the sound because I was sure it was my sister running around all hopped up on candy that she'd smuggled the whole car ride over. My family had taken my mom's cell phone and left my dad's. I felt the phone vibrate and reached into the cushions to retrieve the phone. It was my mom. I muted the TV as my mom asked me what I wanted, food-wise. I started to dream up what I wanted. But then, in the background, I hear my sisters, both of them, arguing with each other as my mom tells them to be quiet because she can't hear me. I'm then completely caught off guard when I hear from inside the house, from just behind me, a giggle. Without hesitation, I stood up and looked around. I moved the phone away from my ear, and I could hear the sound that I'd heard earlier, bare feet running on the hardwood floors. They sounded like they were running away from where I was standing. I put the phone back to my ear where my mom is still telling my sisters to be quiet. And I ask my mom rather loudly if my sister was here with me, or had she decided to go with them as well. My mom said that my sister, both of my sisters, were in the car with them. I told her I wasn't hungry, but that they needed to come home right away. I didn't move from the couch until my family walked through the doors. I told my parents about the incident, and all they could say was, "Don't tell that to your sisters." The next day, when the rest of our family showed up, I was pretty happy. It was so noisy that, even if there was a little ghost child running around, at least I wouldn't be able to tell the difference. I would just mistake it for the real footsteps that were actually filling the house. But deep down, I knew there was something about that house. I don't think it was evil, but it was interactive. Please, if this has happened to anyone else while using the Randonautica app, or if you're a tech person who would have any idea, let me know so I can stop getting the heebie-jeebies about this. My friends and I have used this app many times. Assumably, most of our adventures were obtained by interpretation. For instance, we once focused our intentions on the idea of ladybugs. The pin dropped in the parking lot of a McDonald's, and although we didn't see any real ladybugs, there sure was a red Volkswagen Beetle sitting in the parking lot. Now, aware that most of these excursions are up for interpretation, it still kinda creeped me out. Other trips would bear the same results, more or less, up for interpretation. But interpretations are only existent when the idea of what if still bear a presence. This being said, and the reasoning behind my writing, is because last weekend, after 2 or 3 little destinations involving simple nondescript intent, me and my no longer boyfriend Dawson finally mustered up the courage and set our minds on finding a ghost. We picked a pin that looked like it was heading in the direction of my house, planning on this being our last Randonautica for the evening. Midway through the drive, I began to realize that the GPS coordinates on this pin are not just near my house, but smack dab right on it. Literally dead center. Now pause. This right here is why I bothered to write this. Could this have been a glitch? When we got to my house and confirmed, yep, smack dab right on it, I tried to discourage any imagination for interpretation. But that only left us both thinking, what if? In our separate thoughts, as Dawson dropped me off. I invited him in for movies, but he said he was tired, and so he kissed me goodnight and I got out of his car. Later I'd find out he wasn't tired. He was actually dropping me off to go see his other girlfriend in Bellevue. But that's another story for another time. So, cheater piece of shit Dawson drops me off like a coward in my driveway. My mom's car's in the driveway, and the porch light is on, so it's not too scary, but he's still a coward. Anyways, I unlock my door, and the house is dark. My mom's asleep on the couch, while Netflix displays "Are You Still Watching?" on the TV. She's a nurse and works really hard at her job, so I felt bad slamming the door to accidentally wake her up. But I just really couldn't bring myself to go upstairs alone that night. And slamming the door would negate me having to explain why I'm not wanting to go upstairs to bed alone. Her room is across from mine, so it was almost like I was doing her a favor. But even knowing my mom is in the room right by me, Every bump and creak in the house continues to give my heart a jolt. Little things throughout the day now feel as if I'm questioning my own sanity. Like, I remember putting my keys there, right? I see things out of the corner of my eye, and now genuinely have to wonder, what if? Obviously, I haven't used the app since that night. I just need someone to say that this has happened to them. Or it's a GPS glitch, or anything that could make me feel less afraid of every noise in my house. And if something did manifest through Randonautica, I hope it finds you, Dawson, and I hope it haunts the shit out of you. Though it was something that I'd eventually grow out of, when I was younger, I hated spending the night away from home. This was for various reasons, the main one being that I was afraid of the dark, and sleeping in general just didn't always come easy to me. But all that sleep stuff is a story for another time. The story I'll share today is something I can't really explain. It's more paranormal than medical. Both are terrifying, but this one, it's different. Okay, so this was the 3rd grade, and for me that would be 1996. I'd already had a couple of failed sleepovers under my belt up to this point. But I'd started to indulge myself in fictional horror, special effects, interested in things that were scary, so day to day, or more specifically night to night, wouldn't seem so scary. I got used to the idea of being away from home, as I started to enjoy the people I was hanging out with more than the people at my house. Lisa was my new best friend, and she lived just 1 street over from me. I would always have so much fun at Lisa's house. Her mom and grandma were always cooking the best authentic Mexican food, teaching me Spanish as we listened to their favorite records. She had several siblings and they all seemed to get along, which amazed me. I had just 1 sister and we didn't get along at all. I was the annoying little sister at the time. Lisa and I would love to tell scary stories. Really, this would just be us repeating things that we'd read in scary stories to tell in the dark. But since none of her younger siblings or the neighborhood kids had read those, we for sure got some good scares in. We really felt like we ran that tiny block. So, the sleepover. We'd been playing all day, and it was getting to be dinner time. We ran to our separate houses, me to mine asking if I could stay at Lisa's for dinner, and her asking if I could stay for dinner. The house phone rings and it's Lisa, telling me to grab my overnight bag because it's sleepover time. I got the green light from my parents, threw a bag together, and ran back to Lisa's. I remember eating dinner in her dining room, which wasn't where we usually ate our snacks. I couldn't help but feel like Lisa's house was a lot like other houses. They changed a bit at dark. I shook the feeling, ate my dinner, and as I sat there in between bites, I saw a photo on the wall. It looked like Lisa's mom, but she was wearing a wedding dress standing next to a man wearing some sort of uniform. The photo was black and white and it looked very old. And it was just 1 small photo in 1 small frame on a large wall. The wall had 2 chairs beneath it, and after dinner, I saw Lisa's grandma sit in one of the chairs, and she started knitting. I asked her, "Who is that in the photo?" pointing just above her head. It wasn't Grandma that answered me. Instead, it was Lisa, saying that it was her grandpa, and that the lady in the dress was her grandma. Then Grandma took over the story, saying that he passed away a couple of years ago, Pointing to the empty chair, she explains that this was his chair. Lisa interjects with, "He died in that chair." Her mom pops out of the kitchen, giving her a look and telling her to shush. Then she looks at me, saying it's okay, giving me a wink of reassurance. I didn't want to make anyone feel bad in that moment, but I was slowly starting to regret my decision to spend the night. It was officially nightfall, and we'd occupied ourselves with scary stories and funny stories, and the kids were told to go downstairs if we wanted to stay up and be loud. The adults were going to watch TV and head to bed. I realized in that moment that I'd never been downstairs before. It was technically Lisa's room, but it was a large bonus room, open area really, which was shared with two of her siblings. The first thing I noticed was that there were no windows down there. It was a basement, furnished, but a basement nonetheless. I didn't know why I felt like the room was heavy, like I was a stranger and wasn't welcome there. It was colorful, filled with games, stuffed animals, blankets, all the right elements for a fun and happy space. I hated to admit it to myself, but Lisa's house was scary. I didn't have to tell her that, though. So I kept going like I was having a great time. No worries in the world. Then it was bedtime. Lisa goes to turn off the light, and when she does, I realize that she doesn't use a nightlight. I remember saying something out loud like, "Whoa, it's super dark," hoping that would prompt her to turn on the light or a nightlight. But there was no nightlight. I laid for a long time, and even though I wasn't afraid, after a while, I was unnerved that all I could do was picture in my head the empty chair next to Grandma. Why was I thinking about this? I tried to change my thought process, doing a pretty good job at first. Then I found myself looking across the room. I could see a light. Not a light, though. It was moving. Some sort of greenish-colored orb was moving throughout the downstairs. It was hovering closer to the ceiling than the floor, and it was moving in the direction of where we were all sleeping. It didn't move like anything I'd ever seen. It had more purpose than a fly or a bug that I'd seen flying around. I started to look around the room. It was still pitch black, but maybe this was being projected from something. A reflection of sorts. Not putting together in the 3rd grade that without any light in the room, there's not much opportunity for a reflection. I was ready to give up and just try to get some sleep, but I saw the orb float from person to person, hovering above each of them for a moment. I knew it was only a matter of time before it was above me. As the orb stopped above each of them, I could see that they were all sleeping peacefully. So I imagined myself doing the same thing. I relax and close my eyes, and when I open them next, the orb is above me. But only for a moment. Then I watch as it quickly retracts closer to the ceiling, and then darts up toward the stairs and out of view. I remember laying there, assessing how I felt. It wasn't terrible. I almost felt like maybe I had just met someone. It's hard to explain, but even for that brief moment, it felt like we were looking at one another. Like I scared it as much as it scared me. That night I didn't sleep great. I found that I wasn't just thinking about that empty chair. I was dreaming about it too. At one point I woke up, and it felt like I'd been staring at that chair for hours. I was so confused, and I went back to bed. But the same image remained. A dark dining room with this orangish velvet chair. Grandma's chair was empty too, but the focus was heavily on Grandpa's chair. So that was the night. It wasn't great, but I made it through without having to go home, so I was proud of myself. I'm pretty sure that it was her grandpa. Honestly, I don't think that he appreciated that I had sat in his chair earlier, and that I'd sat there before, too. That, and I think he was surprised to see a stranger sleeping amongst his grandchildren. I recall having some sort of excuse any time another sleepover would come up. Lisa and I would hang out until dusk and then go our separate ways. Sure, I had made it through the night, but I wasn't going to press my luck. When we were kids, my brother and I didn't have any sort of cable, and internet wasn't really a thing, if you can imagine. We'd spend most of our time making potato guns or messing around with gadgets that were retired to our garage. One day we'd found this old radio. It worked, but limited stations since we were out in the sticks. There was also this old TV antenna in the garage, and somehow my brother had found a way to connect the TV antenna to a wire on the side of our house, and then connect the radio antenna. So now we could listen to it in our room, and we had more stations. Not many, but the few that were hardly coming through were now a bit clearer. Eventually, we'd fallen asleep to some music. It wasn't exactly music that we knew, but it was nice to have it radiate through our room as we drifted off in the dark. That night, my brother and I were abruptly woken up by the loud sound of radio static. The radio was in the same spot, but somehow it had adjusted its own volume. Our mom worked really early mornings at the hospital, and our dad drove trucks for a living. So when he was home, he really liked his rest. When we'd initially laid down, we'd made sure to keep the volume real low, as to not bother our parents. After we both realized what it was that woke us up, my brother grabs the radio and turns the volume down entirely. We were both filled with adrenaline. We tried to hold our breath and just listen. Had we woken anyone up? It didn't appear that we had. We exhaled, and my brother set the radio back down on the table between our beds. The table sat in front of the window, and it was a bright night thanks to the moon. With the moonlight available, we could see that the radio started to adjust when my brother set it down. The volume dial didn't appear to be moving, and there wasn't immediately any sound. The tuning dial itself wasn't moving either. But the red marker on the radio, the one that was firmly placed on 98.8, shows that it is moving between stations. It shows that it's moved almost entirely to the beginning of the numbers. I ask my brother if he sees what I see. Then there's an extended pause. By now, our eyes have adjusted to the dark, and I can see that my brother is just staring at the radio. He looks at me and he says, "Yeah," very skeptically, and reaches for the volume dial. It sounds like nothing but static. He then grabs the tuning dial, moving it from side to side. Nothing but static. I don't know what I was listening for, and I don't know what he was doing. But after a few moments of fiddling with the thing, he stops. "Maybe it's dead," he says. Then he goes to unplug the wire that he's connected. He didn't quite get to the wire before we both heard the radio static. The volume somehow adjusted again, and though it wasn't as loud as it was before, it startled us. The static then started to have almost a pattern to it, cutting from station to station quickly on the same count, creating this sound or effect similar to when in a car and the back window only gets rolled down a bit. It leaves you kind of nauseated. But we didn't think we were going to puke, just uncomfortable. But we listened. At first, no words. Until we hear,
Yes,
followed by rhythmic static, and then
we're already dead.
more static. It was 3 different voices, but each word spoken clearly, and then back to the rippling sound of static cutting in and out repeatedly. I felt like I wanted to cry, but I looked at my big brother, and he wasn't crying. So I just asked him what that was. He looked at me, and he motioned for me to turn on the light. So I stretched to the end of my bed, reaching my hand up and quickly retreating back to the head of my bed. Now my brother was holding this thing and disconnecting the wire that he'd connected from the side of the house. The radio had no power now. He turned the knobs from side to side, held it to his ear, then back down. Then, just as he held it to his ear again, a loud, almost feedback noise radiated from the thing. It was a noise so large, it didn't even seem like it could have come from this small radio. My brother screamed in pain, tossed the radio out the window, and motioned for me to quickly turn off the light. So I hurried and shut it off. My brother cursed something under his breath, and then before I knew it, our mother was standing in our bedroom doorway, asking us what the hell we were screaming about, and if we'd even gone to bed yet. My brother said to my mom, "That thing that Dad brought home, that busted radio, well, it works. It's possessed or something," and it screamed in my ear. Apparently, my mom wasn't buying it. The time was 3:30 a.m., and she was just getting up for work, telling us to go to sleep or start on our chores. We didn't sleep, but we didn't do our chores either. Instead, we patiently waited in our room for our dad to wake up. Once he did, we asked him where he got that radio. He told us that he found it in his truck, a quarter way through his last route. He figured that it was one of ours, so he brought it back home. My brother told my dad that he ought to throw it away or burn it, because it had a mind of its own. And to prove his point, my brother went to retrieve the thing, saying, "Come on, Dad, I'm not kidding," as he dashed out of the house, towards the side of the house near our bedroom. We didn't actually follow my brother. Well, my dad didn't. I ran to our bedroom window and looked out. My brother made his way to the side of the house and was looking around curiously. And then, furiously, he looked up at our window, mouthing to me, "What the hell?" And it was clear that he couldn't find the radio. He leaves the side of the house, so I run back into the front room. My dad is getting cereal out and turns to both my brother and I. My brother is now going into a full-on rant about how my dad has to call my mom because he has to know if she moved the radio. My dad refuses, telling my brother that we know we're not supposed to call Mom unless it's an emergency. What I remember most about that day is how long it seemed to take my mom to get home. My dad had pretty much gotten tired of us talking about the radio and told us to go outside instead, that it was probably in the garage and we should look there. But after hours of looking, we came up empty-handed. Finally, my mom got home, and my brother wasted no time asking if she'd seen the radio, asking what she did with it this morning. I could tell that my mom didn't know what he was talking about. As she's setting dinner down, she turns to my brother and says that the radio was sitting on the side of the house this morning. She said that she didn't touch the radio, saying that she made a mental note to tell us to keep those things in the garage and not just laying around. My brother and I were stunned. First, the incident itself, the voices, the static, screams. Now the radio had disappeared. Even creepier, according to our dad's story, it had just appeared in his truck to begin with. We never got any explanation for this, and we never saw the radio again. So, it for sure wasn't ours. It wasn't our dad's. But I'm pretty sure that it was haunted. Now, they say that dog is man's best friend. But what about cats? Because I'm pretty sure my cat helped me identify and banish an evil entity from our home. Like most cat owners, I believe that mine is special. Bun B, short for Bun B Kitty Kitty Meow Boy, is one of the laziest kitties in the world, and I absolutely love it. He's a bit on the fluffy side, and he loves to snuggle. So this was about 3, almost 4 years ago. I'd recently returned home from Mexico, and I'd never had any experiences in my house. I had been the sole renter for the last 5 years, and 0 issues with the place, the neighbors, or the owner. So one afternoon, when I felt the very eerie feeling that someone was watching me, like someone was in my space, I was taken aback. I look at my cat sitting on the couch, now also making eye contact with me. He then looks wildly from side to side and leaps off of the couch, makes some very interesting noises, and darts around the corner, finally retreating to the office. This was officially the first time I'd ever seen my cat run, not exaggerating either. He's a mellow indoor baby who hardly plays with his toys. About 15 minutes goes by. I'm enjoying my food, but now I'm sitting on the couch, my cat back in his normal spot, and I get that feeling again. It's strong. The only way I can describe it is it feels like when someone comes up behind you or is very close. You can sense someone is there, but unless you turn around, you don't really know. Bun B is now staring at the ceiling, moving his head back and forth, like he's following something with his eyes. He starts to make a bit of a growling noise, and his ears pin backwards. Before I can look at him and ask, "What the heck, buddy?" his gaze moved to the floor level, and he leaped off the couch again, this time hissing and making noises I've never heard. He was flat out chasing something, all the way down the stairs. I sit for a moment, listen to Bun run around, and hiss. Another first for me. I've never heard my cat hiss or make these growling noises. While all seemed calm, I decided to look up similar experiences. I found a lot of debunking and a lot of dismissing cats, but I also found some good writings that say cats can indeed chase away unwanted spirits. They can protect your home. They even recommend doing this with your cat, following their warpath, if you will, and telling the spirits that they're not welcome here. They must leave your home now. Yeah, we did it. That night, I walked around following the path I'd seen Bun take and repeated the phrase with authority. I didn't get the feeling again, and I lived in that house for almost 2 years after that. Now, I'm not saying all cats are protectors or can ward off spirits, but I think Bun B is special, and maybe your cat is too. In college, I spent most of my time in a dorm, less than 2 hours away from my parents' house. But during the summers, I would go home and I would stay in my old room. This was the summer before my senior year. I was sitting in my room watching random things on my laptop when I got a call from my sister. I glanced at the clock, 3 a.m. That was strange. My sister's room is just down the hallway from mine. As I went to pick up the call, it ended as soon as I did. Since she wasn't one of my parents, I figured she probably didn't butt dial me, and that she wanted to talk to me but was too lazy to get up. So I got up and walked towards her room. I hadn't even reached her bedroom door when she started screaming. She was screaming that someone was in the room with her, screaming for help. My sisterly instincts kicked in, and without any sort of plan or protection, I threw myself into the door and into her room, also screaming. Nobody was there. But my sister was still crying. She wasn't saying that someone was there any longer, but she couldn't catch her breath. I turned on the lights, and I asked her to breathe, and then I looked around. I'd never heard my sister scream like that before. She was always the calmer one of us two. After she stopped crying, she told me that she woke up unexpectedly, thinking that it was rather dark, but quickly realized that she was surrounded by some sort of figure, feeling as though it was practically touching her face. That's when she screamed. I asked her, "How long were you awake? When did you have time to call me?" Confused, she says she didn't call me. She says her phone isn't anywhere near her, that she's not really sure where it is. She says that it all happened how she said it happened. I didn't think that she was lying to me, but I was sure that her phone called me. I showed her my phone with the call on it. She sees it, but she knows and swears that she didn't do it. So I call her phone, and sure enough, it was actually downstairs, on the couch. I'm slightly frightened when I see that I have the log of her call on my phone. But when I look at hers, I see that she doesn't. I'm pretty sure we both slept in my room that night. Nothing strange ever happened in our house, before or after. But my sister and I agree, if something was trying to harm her, there was something else trying to protect her too. So we can leave it at that, even if we can't really explain it. I used to have this reoccurring nightmare where I was in a dark room. It always started out with me thinking I was in my bedroom with my eyes closed. Then slowly, the feeling of dread would fill my body, and I would realize my eyes were open, but I was blind. Maybe I wasn't blind. I would think this every single time. Maybe it's just dark. So I would focus on letting my eyes adjust to the dark. But when they did, I saw something in the corner of the room. Something that was darker than the dark. Something that my eyes were never allowed to focus on. No matter how much I tried, my eyes never adjusted to that darkness. Then, that corner, it would start to move towards me. And when it did, I could feel my whole body become cold. It just wanted to reach me so bad, and I knew that it would if I let it. So I stopped trying to see it. I just accepted that it was there and focused all my energy on making it go away. I would just stare up at the blackness. No other thought could even remotely penetrate my mind, other than get that thing away from me. It doesn't belong here. Nothing seems to belong here. And just before I could spiral out into that thought, the thought that nothing seemed right, I would wake up, thinking I'm in my bedroom, with my eyes closed. Then, slowly, the feeling of dread would fill my body. I would realize my eyes were open, but I was blind. Maybe I wasn't blind, I would think, every single time. And so it would continue. It felt like forever. Turns out, it was more like 2 months. I'd been in a coma for 2 months, following a car accident that I still can't remember. I can't remember how it happened. I can't remember where it happened. I literally can't remember how I got most of the scars that I have. But somehow, I can't forget the darkness in the corner of that room. I think if I had to guess, I was dancing with death for a while there. This takes place in New York, midsummer. It was my best friend's last day at his old house, which was filled with weird shit. I'd experienced stuff there, and have a few experiences that could be boiled down to ghosts, all the way to feeling like my life was in danger, which is why I refused to spend the night, as that was when the feeling came. So this was their last day at the old house, getting all their stuff to their new house. I was helping them. All I remember from that day is walking in the house and seeing the windows filled with dead flies, like more than I thought could be in a house. And then driving to their new house at night, which had to be at least 8 hours of missing time. I was confused, and I asked them, "Where are we?" And was told we were in nowhere town, on the way to the new house. I said, "But we never got the rest of your stuff." My friend's brother looked at me, concerned, and said, "Yeah, we did." "What happened?" I said. And I was just told that they would tell me later. Yeah, this is a story best to come from their mouths, as I cannot remember it. Just 8 hours, poof, gone. And only their word on what happened. All they said was, I was very quiet the whole time when shit went down in the house. We were driving, and we noticed that there are no other cars on the road, which is strange, as we're going through quite a few small towns, and it was still early in the night on a Friday. The little brother mentions this, and as soon as he does, a bunch of cars come around the corner. At this point, it's just circumstance, but there will be a pattern. We keep driving, and we notice all the houses are completely empty, like lights are on, but we see nothing in them. No furniture, nothing. I mention this, and boom, next house we noticed people just standing in the windows, staring at our car. We notice this in the next 3 or 4 houses. At this point, we're shitting bricks, and notice this drive is taking way too long. They only moved a few towns over, and this drive was taking well over an hour. And it feels like we've been driving near a cornfield for a while. My friend says, "What the fuck is going on? We should be almost there by now." Lo and behold, the cornfield ends, and we recognize where we are again. Seeing a pattern yet? Because I didn't. And I said something I regret to this day. Man, what other weird shit is going to happen tonight? As soon as it came out of my mouth, I knew I fucked up. And my friend and his brother started yelling at me, saying, "Why would I say that?" And we get into a yelling match. We never argue, and my friend slams on the brakes. In front of us is what I can only describe as a big, cat-like animal, the size of a person, with the head of an owl. This, whatever it was, struck so much damn fear into the 3 of us. His little brother, a 20-year-old who played football, just started crying. And I was on the edge, like I was going insane. I want to be in a future scientific career, and this shit wasn't making sense. And I was having a mental gymnastics show, trying to figure it out. My friend just stared at it, until he said someone grabbed their phone. His battery was dead from the time that he was at the old house. This woke me up, and I went to grab my phone, when this whatever ran into the field, into the darkness, as soon as I pulled my phone out. So, we finally get to the new house. We pull in the driveway and back into their parking space, when his brother says, "What in the hell is that?" We look up and see what I can say looked like a pure white Bigfoot, crawling around like a spider. It had red eyes, and it just crawled away into the forest. We sit in the car for 45 or so minutes until their mother arrives. No drugs or alcohol were taken that night. Well, not until after we got into the new house. The best logical conclusion I can come to is there was a carbon monoxide leak in the old house, and we were having a group hallucination. This was by far the weirdest day of my life. I mention the story now because my friend said the new owners of the old house have a for sale sign on it. They were there for less than 2 years. I was told that they had a thriving daycare for about 1.5 years, and then suddenly closed it down. Well, normally, this is where the episode would end. But not tonight. Tonight, we will spend the witching hour listening to what I consider to be the spookiest stories shared on The Darkest Hour throughout Season 1. It was hard to pick, but I hope that you'll all appreciate the choices I've made. So, please enjoy The Darkest Hour, Season 1, Spookiest Moments. I went to high school in Ocean Shores, Washington, a charming little tourist town on the coast of the state. My family owned a home that was beachfront, only separated by a short walk through the sand dunes. As a teen, I didn't always take advantage of living somewhere with full beach access. But I did really enjoy walking through the dunes at night, taking in the sky, listening to the waves. I was about 16, and it was a really clear night, so my girlfriend and I decided to take a walk to the beach to watch the stars. As we were quietly tucked away in the dunes, watching the constellations above us, I suddenly feel my girlfriend nudge me and point. As I follow the direction of her index finger, I see the figure of a woman, slowly walking through the sand and toward the ocean. At this time of night, the beach is completely dark, aside from the illumination of the moon reflecting off the water. Usually, this is a peaceful, serene atmosphere to sit in. But the presence of this figure, her movements toward the water in what looked like nothing more than a nightgown, made the setting feel ominous. The woman didn't seem to notice us as we sat silently watching her in the moon's light. As she neared the water, her steps maintained, unhurried, consistent with the pace she had started. I watched as the figure entered the tide and continued forward. Almost in disbelief of what I was seeing, I looked over at my girlfriend, curious if she was also observing this. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the woman in the water. I turned back to see that her head was almost fully submerged, with only the top of her head above the water. It looked and felt like she was now staring in our direction until she disappeared into the water completely. My girlfriend squeezed my hand. We grabbed our stuff and we ran. When we got back to my house, we felt like crazy people as we tried to piece together what we had just witnessed. We thought about telling our friends or anyone else, but we realized that there would have been too many unanswerable questions. Like, why did we run? Neither of us could really answer that, even to each other, so we decided it would be best to just drop it. That was over 20 years ago, and even today, I still think about the woman in the water. Would you be alive if I wasn't too afraid to help? Were you even alive to begin with? Do you have childhood memories that you grew up thinking were totally normal, but when you became an adult and looked back at them, you thought, wait a second, something wasn't right there? A couple of days ago, my husband and I were walking through town where we saw an old beat-up ventriloquist dummy in the window of the antique shop. It looked like a classic, dating back to the vaudeville days. I knew this because my grandfather used to own one that looked just like it, named Benny. It was handed down from my great-grandfather, who was apparently a pretty talented performer on the vaudeville scene. Before he died, he passed on the art of ventriloquism, along with this creepy-ass doll, to my grandfather. I was a dumb kid, so I thought it was magic when my grandpa would bring Benny out and he would come to life. When I was about 4 or 5, I remember my grandpa used to sit me on his lap with Benny, and they would tell me jokes, and we would all laugh until my stomach hurt. He could even sing a little bit. Man, I loved that creepy doll. Now, as my husband and I stood in front of that window, looking at the old ventriloquist doll, it was nice to recall such positive thoughts of childhood fun with Grandpa. But then, those thoughts were interrupted by a vivid memory. Me, sneaking into my grandpa's closet when he would mow the lawn, so I could play with Benny. I remember Benny being able to talk and sing, just as he'd done before. I didn't think anything of it as a kid. I just thought, that's what Benny does. I still don't really know how to feel about this. This happened to me about a year ago. I had been on the phone with my then boyfriend, and he had said something that made me think he was, well, not a nice person. I told him that if he wanted to talk to me and he knew anything about me, he knew where to find me. So I hung up, got in my car, and I drove to the park. The sun was kind of down below the tree line, but it wasn't fully dark when I had pulled into the parking lot. I thought it was weird that there were two cars pulled side by side talking to each other. When I got out, the guy in the truck just stared at me in a horrible way. You know, when someone just looks at you like they're looking through you, as if you don't exist. I thought, well, that's weird. It's late and no one's ever here. And then I thought, whatever, they're leaving. I don't care. I have my own problems. I only took my keys with me because I didn't want to bring a whole purse. I headed across the field, which you had to cross to get to the woods, because there was no real trail. I was taking my time, calming down, and I realized that it got really quiet. I didn't hear birds or squirrels anymore. I just heard something big moving in the woods. I thought to myself, maybe it's a dog. And then I heard the voices. The first voice, it's a male voice, and he said, I know I saw her go in this way. She couldn't have gotten that far. Then the second voice comes, and it's quieter, and it says, shh, she'll hear you. Okay, so there's two men in the woods, and they're looking for something, obviously. And I kept thinking, it must be their dog. They just lost their dog. And then I thought, they wouldn't try to sneak up on it. I stood there frozen because that's the kind of person I am. I could hear them getting closer to me, but I couldn't do anything. I just stood there, waiting for them to get to me. But then I heard this other voice, distorted like if you heard somebody talking through a closed door or underwater. You could understand what they were saying, but the voice wasn't right. It wasn't in my head because it had volume and pitch, echo. I could almost feel where it was coming from. It was behind me and a little above me, like taller than me. It just said, go to the river now. I don't know if it was more scary, this disembodied voice talking to me or these men in the woods. I listened to the voice because I really didn't have any other options. I took off toward the river. I made a ton of noise because I was just going so fast. And the voice came back and said, no, quietly. I got to the river and jumped down the embankment. I squished myself against it, squeezing down into the smallest, tightest ball that I could. The voice kept telling me to stay, and I just sat there, hoping that whoever was in the woods was going to leave and I wasn't having some kind of breakdown. I kept hearing them moving through the woods, and I could tell that they had split off. As I sat there, the voice kept telling me to stay and quiet, stay and be quiet, over and over again, like it was trying to comfort me. I could hear what sounded like someone was right above me, and if I leaned out, they could see me, but I just had to look. I just tilted my head up a tiny bit, and I could see the tips of construction boots hanging over the edge. And I could see, hanging next to him, a dirty old rope, swinging I don't think I even thought anything. I was so scared I just tried to not even breathe. Felt like hours, but I know it couldn't have been that long. The voice was even completely silent at this time. There was nothing but me hearing this man breathing. He started to walk away at some point. The voice came back, telling me to wait. So I waited. Finally, the voice said, "Go now to the field. Go now." It started screaming this. It was screaming at me so loud, so I ran through the woods and just got out to the field, far, far from the cars and the street. It was getting dark and I could see the parking lot, but it was so far away. I'm running and I start hearing footsteps running. And first, they're further away, but they're so much faster than I am, barreling after me. And there was nothing. I fully expected to see at least one of the two men, but it was silent. The only thing I could think was that the footsteps must have belonged to the voice. And I hear it again, screaming at the top of its lungs that I need to run right now. And the footsteps come back, and they're in pace with me, running next to me through the field. I had 1,000 crazy thoughts because none of this made any sense. Finally, I got to my car, and I see both cars were parked in different places with nobody in them. I refused to look behind me. If there hadn't been a voice, I would probably be a missing persons case. It got me out of there. Growing up, my parents were avid garage sailors, sometimes finding pretty awesome things like a free basketball hoop, a trampoline, even a slip and slide one summer that we used like every summer. And from the time that I was about 6 to 12, I collected dolls. Not Barbies, but mainly porcelain dolls. One year, my parents bought me a porcelain doll from one of their garage sale trips. But this was not just any porcelain doll. This was a 4-foot tall, old-fashioned style porcelain doll. I came home to find it in my room, which scared the shit out of me. I jumped, let out a sort of yelp, stared at it for just a moment before quickly leaving and walking into the kitchen to confront my parents. After a few minutes of being told I was rather ungrateful about the gift my parents had given me, I thanked them for the gift and reluctantly went back to my room. When I entered my room, I looked at the doll, up and down, trying to figure out what it was about this specific doll that I didn't like. It was almost as tall as me, which to some may be the problem, but for me, I had one that was similar, just kind of looked more like Little Bo Peep. The doll had been placed in the sort of middle of my room, so before bed, I moved it to the corner, just tucked it away, next to a majority of my dolls and bears. A couple of days later, I was home alone. My parents would usually only let me stay there if they were running a quick errand, like to the corner store. While they were away, I grabbed my new soccer uniform from the kitchen and went to try it on in the full-length mirror in my bedroom. As I was looking at my own reflection, my attention was quickly drawn to the doll's reflection in the mirror as I saw her left arm move. I just stared at her through the mirror, crazy scared, but also expecting that she'd move her arm again. I screamed when, I swear on my life, this doll shifted her eyes ever so slightly, up, then down, just as another doll sitting above her fell from the shelf. I was really scared at this point, and I just ran out. I didn't want to be in that room. When my parents got home, my mom made me go in there to change out of my soccer uniform, which sucked. I really didn't want to make a fuss at this point because the first time I'd gotten a lecture from my parents. But I really believed that something was wrong with this doll. I ended up covering her with a sheet that night and found it almost impossible to sleep still. The next night, I woke up in the middle of the night and had to pee. The sheet I'd thrown over the doll was on the floor. The doll had moved. She wasn't tucked in the corner, she was further out. The dolls around her knocked over. I truly almost pissed myself. Really not wanting to do that, I mustered up the courage to exit my bed and run to the downstairs bathroom. I ended up sleeping on the couch that night. In the morning, when my parents found me there, I broke down. I told them I was really sorry, but I didn't want that doll anymore. I promised I wasn't making all of this stuff up, and whether they believed me or not, they agreed to let me move the doll into the storage closet outside my room. It had all the board games, toys, and certain things I didn't really play with anymore. My dad saying that he would eventually get rid of it. Please, let's just get rid of it now, I begged him. He put the doll in the closet, and that was the end of that discussion. That night, I woke up to a light thumping. I just knew it was the doll, moving in that closet. And I don't know what came over me, but I jumped out of bed. I turned on all of the lights. I grabbed that doll from the closet, almost as big as me, and I carried that thing downstairs and put it in my dad's office. In the morning, my parents didn't say anything to me about moving the doll. My mom just mentioned that it was moved into the spare room next to the office, and I didn't have to worry about it. They were going to give it away to Goodwill. Naturally, I avoided that room. A few nights, maybe a week later, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of the vacuum running. I laid there a minute, and before running out to ask my parents why they were vacuuming in the middle of the night, I heard quick steps in the hallway coming from their bedroom, headed down the stairs. Jumped up, ran down the stairs relatively close behind my parents, knowing that they were about to understand why I was so afraid of this doll. As soon as they opened the door to the spare room, the vacuum stopped running. I was now in the doorway with them. I could see that the doll was still in the corner where they'd put it, but there was stuff thrown all over the room. And the vacuum, it wasn't even plugged in. When I was younger, I wanted a music box that had a ballerina inside of it. My mom found one at what I believe was an antique shop near our house. She had it restored and customized so that the box would have my name on it. She also made sure to get a newly painted ballerina placed inside. I remember I was so excited just by looking at the outside of the box. My name, I thought. How cool. I brought the box over to the couch in the living room to sit down and listen to the tune that it was going to play, and to watch the ballerina dance. I was disappointed when I opened the box and saw a very dirty, partially broken ballerina sitting on the spring. That's weird, I thought. And then I looked further inside the box and saw that there was another ballerina inside, new and nicely painted, to match my brown skin and my brown eyes, even wearing my favorite color, purple. I decided, no big deal. I'll just switch the two. I took off the old ballerina, and the music made a weird, distorted sound. before stopping. I was sure that I had broken the thing. I put the new ballerina on the spring and hoped that would make the music start again. But sadness swept over my body. I couldn't believe I broke the very thing I'd wanted so badly. I left everything as it was, open, the old ballerina tossed inside of the box, the new one sitting on the spring, no music. I moped my way across the house in search of my mom to inform her of my terrible mistake. I hadn't found her yet when suddenly I could hear the music box playing again. Overwhelmed with excitement, I ran back to the living room, but then I slowed my pace as I saw something that just wasn't possible. The old ballerina, back on the spring, just twirling around, music playing. As I approached the box, I could see that the new ballerina was lying on the floor near the leg of the couch. I was confused because no one was near the living room. When I did find my mom, I could tell that she didn't take me too seriously. I eventually decided to keep the ballerinas as they originally were. The old one on the spring, the new one in the box. The box would sometimes open by itself. I never actually witnessed it, but I would wake up to the music playing, and there it was, open on my dresser. I vividly remember sneaking that music box into another box that my parents were taking to storage about a year later. I never saw it again. Growing up, I was the oldest of 3, and me and my brother and sister played a lot of hide and seek. This happened when I was 11, my little brother 8, my little sister was 6. We were all playing hide and seek, and I chose to hide in a basket in my little sister's closet. I grabbed this big stuffed rabbit and covered myself with the thing, its face smushed up next to my head, covering most of it, a jacket covering the rest. And that's when I heard it. A very heavy breathing from within the closet. I stopped breathing to know that it was not mine. And when I did, I could hear my sister and my brother downstairs. I eventually yelled, "Hello?" and it stopped. I was feeling a bit creeped out, and just as I went to leave the closet, I felt something grab at my hair. I quickly looked back behind me to see if I was caught on something. And as I did, I felt the breathing again. Without much more thought, I ran out of the closet and toward the bedroom door. I stared at the closet for a moment. I wasn't exactly sure what I thought happened, but I didn't appreciate it, and I left the room to meet my siblings. As I started toward the stairs, I felt the need to look back in the room. And when I did, I couldn't believe what I saw. I had closed the closet, but it was open. My siblings were downstairs the whole time, so this had me frightened a bit. When I go to my room later, I noticed that my sister's closet is open again, with a toy snake of mine coming out of the closet. And as I stepped in to see why she had it in there, I noticed that she wasn't in her room. But I heard the breathing again. I booked it to my room and eventually told my parents about the events. They told me I was letting my imagination get carried away, but that closet never felt right. My siblings never reported these same experiences, but my little sister did say that she never used her closet, because one time she got locked inside and it scared her too much. She was younger than me, and I've always wondered if she experienced something similar but couldn't verbalize it fully. So, what was haunted, if anything? The house? The toys? Or was it just that closet? I'm not even sure I'll be able to explain this right. I've tried before, but in writing, maybe it will be different. Keeping in mind I'm explaining something I don't really have an explanation for. I have 3 kids, and they're pretty active. Last night, they'd all asked to go outside and play in the yard. I said yes, and as they headed back, I had to go to the bathroom. In doing so, I have to pass the boys' bedroom to get there. While walking that way, I could see that they left the light on top of the dresser that was against the wall shared with the bathroom. As I walked past the door, something big flew past the light, making a large shadow with wings. Not like bird wings would in a silhouette, but much more like large bat wings. Very large. It literally scared me that I jumped backwards and hesitated walking by the doorway again. But then I heard some of the toys shifting around and the dresser drawers being closed. So I felt like maybe one of the boys had snuck past me somehow. This made me feel okay to pop my head in, where I saw that no one was in there. Standing there, I saw a shadow again, this time begin to fill the room, the entire wall. The intensity was surreal. I found myself actually cowering to the ground to avoid this invisible creature that seemed to be making a very real and very visible shadow. I stood up and made my way to the door, feeling adamant that this couldn't be real, but feeling what felt like real fear. I was conflicted and decided to get out of the room. As I did, I noticed these toys my son has. They're these Japanese build-it-yourself toys, giant robots. They come in various sizes. What was weird or out of place, the one that normally is up on the shelf too high for my kids to reach, was down on the dresser, away from the other 3 that were on the shelf above. Now, normally I would just assume that my son was fixing it or something, but it just didn't add up. I'd been inside that room all day doing laundry, putting clothes in that same dresser just a few minutes before the boys had gone outside. My son hadn't been in that room, and my other son cannot reach them without breaking something or himself. But there it was, sitting neatly on the dresser. So I left it there and I went outside, casually asking my kids if they'd been moving the Gundam toys, they're called, or fixing them, and instantly my son was concerned that someone broke it and he had to go run and check, saying that he hadn't touched it since we'd put it on the shelf. Now, when he returned from their room, he was a little bit annoyed, asking why I was making stuff up about the Gundams, because they were all in their rightful place. And then I asked about the one on the dresser, and he replies back to me, "No, you put it back just fine. Thank you for being gentle." Instantly, I think, what the hell? I cannot reach the shelf without a chair or a stepladder, which neither of those things are in that room, so whatever moved the toy made me look like I was playing some kind of boring, lame prank. So, what the heck was in their room? And how was it big enough to cast a shadow that darkened the whole room? Other strange thing? My dog has not gone into the boys' room since this event. And the latest development, my boys sleeping in the living room, which started 2 nights ago, saying they're hearing scraping and scratches in the wall behind the dresser. I have some work to do, but thought I'd share these happenings with you. Updates forthcoming. Or wouldn't that be great if I had nothing to update or report? Let me know if you have any idea what it is I'm dealing with here. I'm more than willing to take advice at this point. My brother had a stay-in night nurse, and I would always wake up and watch cartoons with her around 3 a.m. One night, when I was about 7 years old, I woke up to see 2 different ladies, but there was only supposed to be one. My brother was a sick kid growing up and needed around-the-clock medical monitoring. So as a result, we had a staff of lovely nurses who would come stay the night and make sure that he made it through the night okay. There was only ever one nurse per shift, and they would often stay up reading or watching cartoons. Being 7 years old, I especially loved cartoons, and these nurses were like family to us, and I adored them. So I'd wake up most of the time, 3, 4 a.m., and go into the living room for some secret snacks, a snuggle, and some Looney Tunes. Anyways, one morning I woke up to see a nurse that I didn't recognize, sitting on the couch. I thought that was unusual because it was always the same 3 ladies, rotating through the shifts. But I was willing to make a new friend. I walked out in my blanket and introduced myself. This new lady then said, "Nice to meet you, Billy. We're here to watch your brother, to make sure he stays with us." I thought this was sort of an odd statement, and I also noted how her clothes looked like clothes that my mom had worn in photos from when she was younger, in high school. To give you a picture, this would be early 80s clothing. But nonetheless, I sat on the couch, and after a few seconds, one of my brother's usual nurses came out of the kitchen with 2 cups of tea. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart? I heard you get up," she said as she raised the cups of tea. The woman beside me was gone, and I was left confused. I told the regular nurse the entire story of the morning, and she said that I must have been sleepwalking or remembering a dream. But it's still a very real memory for me. So much so that I could smell her perfume as I sat on the couch beside her. I remember it well because the nurses didn't usually wear perfume. I liked it. I felt like I smelled it before, but I knew it was not my mom's perfume. I also want to add that during the time my brother was sick, my family had many, many experiences. They all brought us to the belief that my brother was being taken care of, not only by nurses in this realm, but possibly from other ones as well. I regularly thank the universe for the person my brother's become. He was supposed to be nonverbal and potentially bedridden his whole life. Yet here he is, very much verbal and mobile. 27 years later, he's grown into a talented, hard-working high school counselor, basketball coach, and volunteer firefighter. So proud to call him my brother and my best friend. I can't say enough good things about him. But also, I can't say enough good things about these angels, as my mom likes to refer to them. To all the nurses out there, really, you are the true heroes in this world. And maybe others, too. I have a few different experiences, but I'll tell you the one that I tell the most. It's probably one of my more frightening stories, and luckily I didn't have to experience it alone. My sister has been able to validate the story as I've shared it in life. I was about 14, so my sister Jenny would have been about 12. It was July, and we were out of school for summer break, looking for something to do. It was mid-afternoon, so there was nothing spooky going on at the time. We were just sitting upstairs in my room on my bed. I grabbed a box of cassettes from under my bed and joked that we should listen to some of the old stories on a tape player. Since we were bored and we knew we wouldn't be going anywhere until at least one of our parents got home, we decided what the heck, and my sister ran and grabbed the tape player from the computer room. The story we decided on was a classic, Disney's The Rescuers. Originally, it had come with a book to read along with, but we'd lost that years ago. So we were listening to the story for all of 2 minutes when my sister got antsy and started talking. We'd missed some of the story, which wasn't a big deal since we knew the story, but she jokingly zipped her lips and hit the rewind on the tape player. When she hit play, that's when we heard a voice. Not the melodic voice that had narrated this story for us our whole lives, but a deep voice, a man's voice. Just the voice itself invoked fear within me. It was like anxiety and terror and all bad things somehow personified into this voice. We froze to listen, and while we did, every awful thought or horrible feeling I've ever had rushed through my body. The words are still frightening to recall.
You are mine. You are my children. Your souls are mine. You are mine.
I reached over and shut off the tape player. I looked at my sister, who was sitting, stunned and quiet. And after a long while, I said, "It's a very old tape player. It's very old and it just malfunctioned." Jenny nodded slowly. She was willing to accept my analysis of what had happened. We didn't talk about it again for a while, and we never listened to the tapes or used the recorder again. When we finally did talk about it, we asked our parents whatever happened to all those old tapes in the tape player. Turns out they donated them to the local library. This was when we still lived in Kennewick, Washington, and we're now in Utah. But we looked it up and there aren't any copies at that local library, according to the website. So I guess I'm curious if anyone out there is holding on to a copy of Disney's The Rescuers on tape. And if so, have you heard anything strange? A family of Bigfoot used to live on my aunt and uncle's property in eastern Washington. From the back patio of the house, I'd watch them with binoculars as they'd casually travel in and out of the forest clearing, sometimes carrying large branches with them, back and forth. There were 4 members in this Bigfoot family. They all had thick brown fur and ranged in size, the largest Bigfoot easily being close to 8 feet tall. Over the years, as they became more aware and comfortable with our presence there, the sightings of them became more and more frequent as they'd go about their routines. They never tried to contact or interact with us, and we sure never tried to approach them either. We were happy spectating safely from 100 or so yards away. My uncle was able to amass quite a collection of tapes that he'd recorded from his handheld camcorder. He had a shoebox filled with stacks of grainy footage that he was able to capture over the years, and he was proud to play them for any neighbors or family that would stop in. Back in the 1980s, there was no YouTube that you could put your videos on for the world to see. Back then, when you recorded a video, your audience was whoever you could fit in your living room to watch it. He even went as far as giving the Bigfoot family names: Tim, Tom, Lucy, and Bill. Bill was the biggest. Lucy was a bit shorter, and Tim and Tom were equal height. And my uncle swears he could identify and separate each member's tone when we'd hear them communicating with each other. We all knew Bill's roar because it was the deepest and loudest, levels above the other grunts and hollers that would echo through the trees. But most of the time, the Bigfoot family stayed silent. One humid July night, we heard Bill let out a sound that shook our windows. Then, all of them started going wild. My uncle barges into my room asking if I hear what's going on outside and if I can see anything out my window. It's dark, but by the little glow provided by the moon, I can see none of the Bigfooter in the 100-yard clearing. My uncle tells me to stay in my room as he fumbles to put a new tape in the camcorder and rushes out the back door. Then, from my window, I watch my aunt join him on the patio while he anxiously pans his camera across the tree lines as the forest continues to emit sounds of chaos. In a gasp of shock, I hear my aunt point out something running through the branches fast. My uncle turns his camera, and we see either Tim or Tom rip into the clearing from the trees. He's screaming wildly and coming right for the house. My uncle doesn't budge. He keeps his camera fixed on the fast-approaching Bigfoot. I put my face against the glass and watch this creature get about 50 yards from the house, when it suddenly collapses, lifelessly, into the grass. Then I notice another figure emerge from the tree line, but this one doesn't resemble a Bigfoot. It was much smaller. From my view, this new figure walking toward the Bigfoot looked like a human. As the figure neared, its head jerked up in the direction of my aunt and uncle. This made them both dash inside and lock the doors. They both came into my room, and we watched as this figure grabbed the Bigfoot's legs and dragged it back into the darkness. One by one, the shouts and roars became fewer and fewer, until the forest was silent again. The next day, there's a knock on the front door. I'm sitting in the kitchen eating cereal, and my uncle answers it. From the kitchen table, I see standing in the doorway are two men in black suits and fedoras. They look identical to one another: pale skin, sunken blue eyes, no eyebrows, their faces completely hairless. Their appearance scares me enough that I take my cereal into my uncle's room to eat it in there. Moments after I close the door to continue to eat, my uncle opens the door. I greet him and tell him I won't spill cereal on their bed, but he ignores me. His eyes don't even look over at me. Walking past the bed, he makes his way to the closet, where I see him retrieve his shoeboxes of tapes. He maintains his glossy stare as he exits the bedroom. Following behind him, I poke my head out the door and watch him hand the shoeboxes to the scary men. When they leave, the dazed look on my uncle's face fades away, but he immediately becomes violently ill and spends the remainder of the day asleep on the couch. Later, when I tried to ask about the two men in suits, my uncle wouldn't give me any more information besides those men needed my tapes. Any further questions of mine were met with, "I don't know, but it's best we don't concern ourselves with it." My aunt and uncle passed away in the early 2000s, without me ever getting more answers. We didn't talk about the event or the Bigfoots after that. I still live on the property in eastern Washington, but have never had a Bigfoot encounter since that night. And if I do, I don't think I'll be filming it. This happened back in 1995, when I was approximately 11 years old. My family had a house on a golf course, and my best friend, lived in the houses on the other side of the course. To get to my friend's house, there were paved paths that the golfers used, but it would literally mean walking all the way around instead of just cutting through the center, making a 5 to 6 minute walk more like a 1-minute walk. It was frowned upon, but despite not being as well lit as the actual path, it was quicker, and that was the goal. I wasn't afraid of the dark anyways. As I walked back home and ran up the hill, my ears picked up on a low humming noise. It sounded pretty close. I looked over my shoulder, and just above my head, in the sky, I see a literal spaceship. At least, that's all that I can conceptualize it to be. It's got a round, disc-like shape, bright lights on the bottom lining the craft's circular exterior. It was dark, so that could be why the lights seemed so incredibly bright. I guess the best way to explain them would be that they gave off the same brightness as an LED light. Like most lights, it was blinding to look at. The shape, though. I had for sure never seen something that was actually circular, maintaining position in the sky. I mean, other than a drone, but that's only in the last 10 years, and this was in the 90s. I'm certain that there was nothing, and probably still is nothing like it, on the market. So as I see this thing, it's hard to tell how far away it is. It is closer than I think, and therefore something much smaller than a plane. Or was it the other way around, too far away to really grasp its size? Continuing my walk, trying to keep my cool, but then I realize that this thing is coming for me. I start to feel a bit uneasy, and then it turns to full-fledged fear when the low humming seems to get closer, and the craft itself seems to be getting closer. The lights brighter. I was sure that it was trying to make physical contact for whatever reason, but at this point, I'm so scared that I start running back to my house. I'm about 30 seconds away from the little walkway that leads to my backyard. I turn around to try to watch the thing, keeping an eye on the distance I've made. But I'm disappointed to realize I haven't put any distance between us, that it's still chasing me, closer than ever. What I can see now is that the craft is definitely smaller than what I initially anticipated. No way that whatever was inside this thing was larger than a small child. It couldn't be more than 6 feet wide, and the top seemed to have only a small dome, maybe 3 feet at its tallest point. Either way, I was still terrified at its speed, and more terrified that it seemed to have intent. As I stop at the path to my backyard, I can feel this thing is just behind me. The low humming is deafening now. I can feel my whole body begin to vibrate, and so much light seems to fill the area in front of me, around me. I can't even see the craft any longer. It's completely covered in white light. I can hardly see anything outside of my own 2 hands in front of me. I know I'm close to home, so I keep pushing forward. I think I'm running, but I can't tell. And then, in what feels like the blink of an eye, I'm standing in front of my back door with my hand on the door handle. Once that registers, I quickly open the door and run inside the house. My mom greeting me, asking me why I'm so out of breath and what took me so long to get home. I had no idea what to say about why I was out of breath, and when I looked at my watch, I could see that it was almost 10 o'clock at night. But I'd called my mom from my friend's house, telling her I was heading home at 9. Somehow, a 1-minute walk turned into an hour. I have no explanation for the lost time, and I can't even decide what it is I think this was. I've never seen anything like that, and I've never had anything like that happen since. I can't even definitively say I believe in aliens, but I do believe that something of intelligence was controlling that craft that night. Really, I don't know what I believe, but I often wonder, if I could get back that missing hour, what would I learn from it? Was it something I'm supposed to forget? Or was it something I'm supposed to remember? Growing up, I didn't always like staying at my grandparents' house. If I did, I'd always try to get away with sleeping on the couch, even though they didn't like that. The thing is, there was something wrong with their guest room. Even before this event, I didn't like that room. It always gave me a really bad feeling. I couldn't explain it even as a child, now as an adult. But it also seemed to have shadow people. The best way I can explain this is that there was nothing in the room to make the shadows that would appear. And furthermore, there was nothing that would make these shadows move the way they did. Most of the time, I tried to ignore them, closing my eyes or turning on the lights and falling asleep that way. One night, I remember it was particularly hot, and I was tossing and turning a lot. At some point, I decided to poke my feet out from under the blankets at the bottom of the bed to cool down. I hadn't even really started to doze yet when I felt something grab my feet. I immediately jolted, but it felt like whatever had grabbed my feet was still holding them. I continued to struggle and reached over as far as I could to the bedside lamp. I turned it on. There was nothing. I could move my feet again, so I did. I moved them into the living room, onto the couch. And honestly, I never slept in that room again. And to this day, I can't sleep with my feet hanging off the bed or out of a blanket. Just creeps me out. Last year, it was my turn to take the kids trick-or-treating. My wife and I would trade back and forth every year. At this time, my son and daughter were 7 and 9, and usually, I would stay on the street while my kids would go up to the various houses to collect candy. After about a half an hour of walking around, we came to one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting, a main street in the neighborhood. The one with the big candy bars. Lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns. So naturally, I became a bit distracted and stopped watching my kids super closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a weird homemade mask, like a cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked if she could trick-or-treat with us, so I said sure, and we carried on together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was a friend from school. As we continued, I started to notice a large man trailing behind us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask. It was rather creepy, to be honest. I thought that he must be the father of the girl, so I tried to start some small chat with him as he got closer to me. I said something like, "Nice weather, eh?" But he didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at me. While our kids went up the stairs to the next house, he did the same thing, stood there, staring at me. I tried again, asking, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded, but didn't say anything. I figured he just wasn't in the mood for chatting, so I stopped trying. We carried on for about another 15 minutes, until suddenly my kids came up to me and said that they wanted to go home. This surprised me as we hadn't been out for very long, and their bags were only about a third full. In any case, I agreed, waved goodbye at the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and started on our way home. The weird thing is that when I glanced back, the man and his daughter were just standing there, staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not having moved at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, So, who was that girl? My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. She's your friend, my daughter replied. I asked her what she meant. Apparently, the girl with the cardboard mask approached them and said that she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask me if she could join us for trick-or-treating, and she wanted my daughter to ask instead. I laughed at this story, and I replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she was a friend of mine? I don't have any children friends." What my daughter said next chilled my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing the mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turns out, she wasn't a girl at all, but an older woman around my age with wrinkles on her face. What's even more disturbing, the old woman had started to steal treats from my daughter's bag, apparently when I wasn't looking. This is why they had asked to go home. The old woman was creeping them out, and they just wanted to get away from her. I brought my kids home and I told my wife what happened. We made sure to check through all of their candy, but didn't find anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the police or anything since nothing really happened. But thinking back, I kind of regret that decision now. What the heck was that old woman doing? And who the hell was the man that was following us around? I don't think I'll ever know. I just think it's sick that there's people out there on Halloween, hiding behind masks, pretending to be children. The sickest part probably being their intentions. You don't slide on a mask to deceive children and steal their candy if you have good intentions. That's for sure. Okay, friends, this really is the end of tonight's episode. The finale ends here. But don't worry, The Darkest Hour lives on. And after just a short couple-week break, we will return to the airwaves, right here on neoretrofm.com. If you haven't already, please be sure to follow me on Reddit, Amanda Jane FMN, and The Darkest Hour's subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. There, you'll find our YouTube channel. And if you're a Facebook person, please be sure to like The Darkest Hour. Our page was just created, and your support would mean the world. Last but not least, do you have stories like these? Because I would love to share them for Season 2 of The Darkest Hour. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on our subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Thank you times a million for your support of The Darkest Hour. Take care of yourself and stay spooky.